Today's speaker is Dr. Niraj Nijhawan, who was raised in Milwaukee and is a graduate of the University of Wisconsin Medical School. He completed a medical residency in anesthesiology critical care at the Medical College of Wisconsin. Dr. Nijhawan has spent nearly 30 years cataloging, practicing, teaching, and helping people integrate the latest knowledge from the realms of medical, social, and neuroscience into their lives. He has titled his speech to us today as Stop the Madness, 2 Steps to Save the World. We look forward to your presentation, Dr. Nijhawan, and we've made a contribution to the Rotary International Polio Plus Fund as a way to say thanks for speaking to us today. As Dr. Nijhawan makes his way to the podium, I want to mention that if time permits at the end of his presentation, you're welcome to come up and ask him a question here at the front table. Thank you.
Okay, let me just check my technology. Let's see that this is working. Hopefully I don't blind somebody in the eye here. Okay, we're good there. All right. Thank you so much for having me. It's a real honor to be on this important platform. In particular, thanks to Charles McClymans, Laura Gallagher, Michelle McGrath, Rich Leffler, Paul Riemann, especially Paul Riemann, who have been dear friends and have been very supportive of this collection of ideas, and so I'm grateful for that. And this, I'm a practicing physician. It's in the areas of anesthesiology and critical care. I practice actually in Aurora healthcare system, but I live in Madison. Long story. But the reason that UW Medical School thing is up there is because that's where this story starts that I'm going to share with you. And what I'm going to share with you is pretty intense in terms of, I'm actually going to suggest that you change the way you approach life. Nothing short of that. Nothing. Stop the madness, save the world, change your life. No, I'm not setting the bar high at all. But what I'm teaching, or what I'm going to be conveying to you, is all based on science. And we have really good data to show that this works, that if you take these ideas in, and it doesn't have to be the way that we teach it, some form of this, you have so much more malleability than you realized, and so much more potential for happiness and effectiveness and connectedness that you should take advantage of it. And regardless of stage of life, regardless of what your educational status is, none of that matters. So that's the ultimate message is very hopeful for what I'm going to present to you, but the initial part is a little bit intense. So basically, the way my story started is, and by the way, the reason we do this is on the heels of July 4th especially. I'm really grateful to be an American, and this country has given me a lot. And so this is my way to give back. And so, but this country, where there's really a lot of suffering right now, and I think, we need to do something about it. And I think there's some really, the good news is there's some really powerful changes that can happen really fast. We've seen it happen. And so I want us to learn these things and teach these things in whatever form you can. So it's very important that we learn this and teach it, because there's an incredible amount of struggle out there. And so what happened was, when I was in med school, it goes backwards. So when I was in med school, so we talked about American suffering. I had my own incredible suffering as a med student here up the street at UW, transitioning from second year of med school to third year of med school. Oh, okay. Is that okay? Is that better? That's okay? All right, thank you. Transitioning from second year of med school to third year of med school was actually really brutal for me. I was really good at books and sports, but I was good at nothing else pertaining to life. And that transition from second year of med school to third year is basically books to life and people, and I couldn't do any of it. And so my confidence was shattered. I ended up having to take a year off of med school to figure out what to do with my life. And another emotional phase of this talk is, and I'll stop being emotional after this, two angels that really sort of came in and saved me. One is my wife of 30 years who stabilized me emotionally, and then another dear friend who's a practicing physician in Boston. I won't name his name because he'll be horrified if I catch his name on tape, because he's very humble. He sort of helped me fall in love with learning. And to that point, I really didn't care about learning, believe it or not. Med school was just an accolade. And so the combination of that stabilization period, the passion for learning, and then I acquired a science degree, as you mentioned, Andrea, and then the medical background. It's been 30 years of just uncovering fascinating discoveries that are out there, first of all, to help myself, and then started to incidentally teach it to other people and started to notice results. And then we're like, okay, I guess we should keep going with this. In fact, based on my NIH scientist training grant and what I had learned about medical science was that there was not a lot of science behind a lot of our medical decision making. So I wrote a book called Modern Medicine is Killing You, which is based on 10 years of work and 1,000 references, because I was horrified by how we were deploying resources and the large-scale mistakes we were making. And so I was very scientifically skeptical of what we were doing. But then I incidentally just gave a talk on the science of happiness, which is my real passion subject. And we handed out like 65 feedback forms, and all 65 came back, and everybody wrote their email down and said, we want more information. We asked a yes or no question. I was stunned by the response to that. And this is about 10 years ago. And so I said, all right, this is, there's so much passion for this, and this is my subject of passion. So I kind of dropped the healthcare reform book. I will come back to it eventually, because there's still a great need for it, that kind of, various kinds of innovative approaches, not just that approach. And so then started to put together programs on the science of happiness and effectiveness, and one thing led to another. And so then it turned out no matter where we went, we delivered to chronic pain patients. We saw incredible improvements in depression and addiction. We worked with a Division I golf team, Marquette, who had won one Big East championship in 25 years. And then after we worked with them, they won 3 Big East championships. So these young men flourished from these set of tools, some of which we'll teach you today. We delivered the program through webinars. We delivered to executives, to organizations. I think we're not, oh, there we go. Okay. So anyways, the point is that we realize that there's a universal quality that we all have. Again, it's nothing to do with our program. There's a universal quality that we have in terms of how malleable we are, and I want you to keep remembering that. And so that's kind of how this journey began, and how some of these concepts came about that I'm now going to share with you. So coming back to that suffering part that I mentioned at the beginning, there is, and working in an inner city hospital, Sinai, downtown Milwaukee, it is stunning what's happening right now to tens of millions of people. Alcohol-related deaths now are smashing records every year. Not just opioid, but drug-related drug overdose deaths are exploding year by year. Illicit drug use around the world continues to rise. Suicide rates are setting records, and especially for Caucasian Americans, which is a stunning realization, especially just a couple of years ago, that something is awry, especially amongst 30 to 50-year-old men without college degrees. They are in a kind of hell right now that we need to do something about. And we can't just dismiss them as a basket of deplorables, as somebody unfortunately characterized them. That's not going to help. We have to give them the tools to be able to figure out why they are suffering so much right now. Young women's suicide rates are setting records, sadly, year by year. And then this is an article that just came out a couple weeks ago showing how, yes, we're setting records in all these death categories. It's very sad. And in fact, if you look at American life expectancy, it's dropping much more substantially than the other OECD, the 30 richest nations in the world. I can't tell you, I mean, mathematically how profound this change is. To change lose 1 year of life expectancy is at approximately 300 million life years. It would be like 10 million people dying 30 years prematurely. I mean, it's a stunning amount of premature death. And so this is greater than any war that we have experienced by far. So at the peak of the Vietnam War, we lost 16,000 people. Yes, the population was less, I realize that, but not that much less. World War II, we averaged about 100,000 deaths per year. We're losing at least 200,000 to 300,000 deaths minimum from mental health crises right now, at a minimum. And so this is greater than any war that we have ever experienced. The battlefield has just changed. And so now we as Americans have to rally to the new battlefield, and I believe we can and will. And so, and also college and high school and middle school depression and anxiety rates are setting records year by year. Engagement scores drop. The further you go along in life, the less happy we are, right? So what is going on with us right now? What's the problem here? So one of my arguments is you have to recognize that your brain is not here for your happiness, okay? So if I pose it that way, think about it for a second. What is your brain here for? Survival is typically one of the answers that's provided. Good. And that's usually, that's a yes. There's even a better one. Want to yell it out? What's that? Would be very evolved, but I don't know. We ain't there yet. I think we can get there, though. Propagation of genes is the #1 purpose of the brain. Okay, if you think about evolution and natural selection, the qualities that allow your genes to go to the next generation are going to be the ones that dominate. That's just how evolutionary biology works. And so the brain is really designed for survival and getting the genes passed on to the next generation. And if you don't recognize that and you aren't actively involved in shaping your brain, it's going to take over with its own agenda and make you suffer incredibly. And that's what's happening right now for reasons that I will explain, especially now. So to put things in perspective, one of the questions I'll ask is, and it's harder to ask with a large group like this, but if you had, we've been in human or humanoid form for about 2.5 million years, and then I usually ask, if this is a theater with about 500 seats and you were looking at it, how many of those seats would represent us being farmers, and how many of those seats would represent us being hunter-gatherers? Think about the farmers in your mind. How many seats out of the 500 would represent us being farmers?
15.
Pretty good. Answer is 1. So 1 seat farming, 499 seats hunter-gathering, right? So these are hunter-gatherer brains. So we've been farming effectively since 3000 BC. That's when we reached critical mass of food supply, leading to language development, etc. And we can debate about the exact time, but it's about 5,000 years out of 2.5 million, 1 in 500. So these are hunter-gatherer brains, okay? We have to remember that. These are not modern brains. These are not farming brains. These are hunter-gatherer brains that are now colliding with the modern world. Let's talk about that a little bit more. So part of the natural selection process of making sure that these brains and our genes would go on to the next generation is we developed this elegant system we created an acronym called CFAST, which is we have this craving system or a reward system. We also have a fear system, an anxiety system, a stress system, and a thinking system. And I'm going to highlight just 2 today, the craving and the anxiety system. But these systems are being thoroughly rattled by the modern world because, again, these are hunter-gatherer brains that are not prepared for the modern world. And that's why there's so much disruption, destabilization occurring right now. And if we don't do something about it, some of the disruption, mental health problems, and some of the political chaos, whether you're left or right, I really don't care. There's chaos on both sides, on the left and the right. And so we have to do something about that. Otherwise, the revolution that comes afterwards is going to be a lot harder to control. And so these are the various parts of the brain that represent CFAST. And I think, are these slides going to be made available? I can't remember if we talked about that or they are? Yeah. Okay, and this is being videotaped, so don't worry about trying to take all this information in. Sometimes information overload, sorry. It's an addiction. And so let's talk about the C part of the C fast, okay? This is really interesting, craving. So the reward center of our brain, in particular the nucleus accumbens and the ventral tegmental area and others, these are networks really, has this trick called dopamine. It's a neurotransmitter. Most people have heard about dopamine by now. See a lot of heads shaking, yes. But what's really interesting about the dopamine system is that it has the ability to go negative, as you can see on here. And so what the lower brain has a trick up its sleeve is it can make you feel crappy if it's not getting what it wants. I want more, and I'm going to show you what the more is. So there's FOMO you've heard of, right? Fear of missing out. I want more experiences, more resources, more pleasure. A fear of being left out. I want to be a part of the tribe. Self-esteem, by the way, is self-esteem important? Show of hands. Yeah. I will argue self-esteem is not only not important, it's a waste of time and a destructive force. Okay, I warned you. Self-esteem is an evolutionary brain trick, and we're going to show you how to get rid of it so you can be truly happy and powerful. That's coming up. So that's also a dopamine trick because, when we're embarrassed or someone makes fun of us or we're criticized or we, are vulnerable somehow, you get that funny feeling in your stomach, right? That's dopamine, all right? And it's there, the lower brain saying, don't you dare let our social status go down because I will kill you if you let that happen. Why? Because social status was the key predictor of both survival and gene propagation. Getting the mate was dependent on social status, right? Surviving was dependent on social status because you could trade your credibility for access to the cave, access to the tribe, access to the resources. You see, and it lights up dopamine, nucleus accumbens, self-esteem, social status lights up in the brain just like crack cocaine. So we are addicted to self-esteem because this is how we're designed, right? For survival and gene propagation purposes. But it's going to create problems that I will share with you, besides the yucky feeling I just described, and fear of loss. So this is the craving part of the lower brain story. And then there's the anxiety part of the lower brain story. We'll just focus on those two. The C-fast, here's the A in the C-fast, is that we're designed to be hypervigilant, and always thinking about problems, always on the lookout for problems. And so anxiety, a good definition of anxiety is fear of the unknown. And for most of human history, the unknown has been food, right? Or risk to life, right? But now the unknown has absolutely exploded. And that unknown is the future, right? The future has never been more unknown than it is now. Give you an example. So parabolic curve, similar curves are there for population growth, world GDP growth. This is information generation. We've generated more information in the last 5 years than we have in all of the last 5,000 years, basically. We have data transmission rates are also parabolic. And so the world is changing so rapidly that the future is completely unknown. And that's creating a big spike in anxiety, as well as disrupting the craving system that we talked about. And in fact, for Americans and Europeans, there's another factor that's causing us to be rattled, which is that we had the Europe and the United States collectively had up to 76% of GDP as of, I think, even maybe 30 years ago. But now we represent 48% of GDP, right? So the rest has now passed up the West. Remember that craving system that says, you want high self-esteem? Well, we were hooked on that because we were the dominant force in the world for the last 100 years. And that's being threatened. If that's part of our identity, it's very destabilizing, okay? And we need to break free of that identity in order to get back to being the powerful, conscientious innovators that we really are. I really believe we need to get back on the world stage to do good. And so that loss of self-esteem has also been very rattling for a lot of people who that's all they had to make them happy. They didn't have the we haven't done a good enough job of helping people to be lifelong learners. So they're not intellectually adaptable. We haven't done a good enough job with emotional vulnerability, which is also a key piece of the puzzle. And so if you don't have emotional vulnerability and you don't have intellectual vulnerability, and then we have this rugged individualism thing, right? So rugged individualism is also a problem. So if you don't have tribe and you don't have adaptability, what happens when you have rapidly changing circumstances? You basically freak out, and that's what we're having is a large-scale freak out as a nation right now, okay? So this is part of the brain science explanation for why this is happening, but the good news is we can actually do something about it faster than we realize. Sorry to scare you with that little scream there. That was your lower brain reacting to that. So in summary, C and A are really being jacked up. Actually, all CFAST is being jacked up right now. Which is also a big factor. The thinking part of the brain is a major reason why sleep patterns are so disrupted for Americans. Keep that fact in mind when I show you the data at the end of the presentation. All right, so that's all bummer stuff. That's all really depressing. Now let's have some positive stuff, please. So there is this superpower that we have, and when I mentioned neuroplasticity, this is a very erudite group, so you know what neuroplasticity is, but just to remind you a little bit more granularity on that, neuroplasticity basically means you can shape your brain, right? This is much greater superpower than you realize. We actually have the ability to grow and shrink any part of our brain, I mean the ones that really matter for life. And this is, we know why to do it now, we know how to do it, we know where to target it. It's actually very exciting times to be aware of this superpower, and we need it more than ever to reconfigure our brains to deal with this rapidly changing world. So, and the problem is if you don't take full grip on this, the superpower is going to go to your lower brain, which is what's happening right now, okay? And so proof of the fact that you have this incredible power called neuroplasticity. There we go. So there's a famous nun study where a group of about, I think, close to 1,000 nuns donated their brains for science after they died, not before. I mean, they were gracious, but they weren't that gracious. And many of them had Alzheimer's plaques, and none of them developed Alzheimer's. So they actually were able to reroute around the Alzheimer's plaques in order to not develop Alzheimer's. Pretty incredible. And then studies on musicians showing that that part of their brain grows. The more committed they are to their craft, the more that part of their brain grows. Taxi cab drivers in London, that's been shown to be linearly correlated with intensity and time of commitment to their craft. There we go. Maybe I can hold that up there. Meditation, the more meditation you do, the more basically the higher brain, and we're going to talk about the higher brain, by the way. CFAST was the lower brain, but we're going to talk about this other powerful part of your brain called FAST-C, which is your higher brain, and that actually becomes more and more powerful over time as you do meditation. And meditation can be anything. It can be prayer, it can be chanting, it can be singing. There's no one way to do it, by the way, so don't get wigged out by that word, meditation. So, as some people do. And so, no matter what you focus on, that part of your brain becomes more and more developed and more powerful. So we now know definitively that we all have this ability, and it's not a function of intelligence, it's not a function of talent. We have definitively proven now that success, and let me see this is a good way to present this. Basically, that's your computer system. This is your brain. That's one neuron on the left. And then it has all these branches that come off of it called dendrites. And so we realize that we actually have the ability to grow those branches, neuroplasticity, till the day we die. We now know that. That power does not go away. And we know how to fuel it, too. It's basically time, focus, and emotions that allow that neural network to grow. Okay? And so the question is, why do we want to harness this superpower called neuroplasticity? There's a couple reasons that we want to really take advantage of it. Let's see if there we go. All right. So here we introduced the higher brain. So CFAST was the lower brain. Now comes this other incredible set of networks that we all have called, we call it the higher brain, but it's FAST-C. There's a focus network, there's an awareness network, there's a stability network that if you make it powerful enough, it can actually stop the lower brain. That whole CFAST, lower brain, stops it from even coming on board, coming online, or shuts off instantaneously. There's a transcendence brain. We actually know where love and joy are in the brain, and we know that those parts of the brain can keep growing over time if you focus on them. The connection part of the brain can be developed and grow as much as you want it to. It's pretty incredible, right? So that's a great place to start with applying the superpower, is knowing that you have infinite capacity to make your higher brain become more and more powerful. It becomes even more interesting is that the journey to getting to growing your neural networks requires, like I said, time, focus, and emotions. But there's actually a shortcut to that, which is feedback. Andrea, you were mentioning feedback in the beginning, and we welcome your feedback. I don't know if you really meant it, but the crowd got a little hostile there for a while. That might be too much feedback. But it turns out, and I want to connect a couple of threads, because I know I left one thread behind, which is that it is now definitively proven, a couple of really powerful concepts I want you to remember. One is that it's now proven that, like I said, talent and intelligence is not the predictor of being great at anything. There is now no evidence for that. There is 100% evidence that time devoted and the quality of practice is the key to being great at anything. And that makes sense now that we know so much about neuroplasticity and how it works, okay? A shortcut way of getting to neuroplasticity, time, focus, and emotions, is feedback. That's made me think of that at the beginning there. Feedback tolerance, the key to being genius of anything, and I'll show you, it doesn't matter what you want to be genius of. The key to being genius is how much feedback you can tolerate. That means I could be a genius stay-at-home parent, it could be a genius teacher, a genius CEO, a genius janitor. It actually doesn't matter. Feedback tolerance is the key to growing your neural networks. Remember the self-esteem part of the story we were talking about? There's a conflict coming here between self-esteem and feedback tolerance, all right? We're getting there. So why do you want to take on feedback and all the pain of feedback? Because the journey of developing neural networks itself is very exhilarating. There's an acronym I use, EAT, E-A-T. Exhilarating, because as you are pushed to provided feedback for how you're performing in anything, in any task, any role, anything you do in life, we can have it be subject to feedback. That focusing that it causes, and sometimes that unsettling that it causes, the emotions that it causes, also creates an activation of the higher brain, the FAST-C. And that's what these 5 graphs are. The graphs themselves are made up. But the components of the brain and the key neurotransmitters and hormones that correspond to those subcomponents are real, right? So you have the focus brain, the awareness brain, stability. The alphabet soup doesn't matter. But we know where they are, where these networks are. We know what neurotransmitters they primarily utilize, or hormones, and they go up. And they don't go negative like that dopamine trick of the lower brain. Why this matters is that as you push yourself to be really good at something, it's exhilarating. And then you develop more neural networks. Then your higher brain also becomes more activated. And then with greater and greater neural networks, you're also able to connect dots a lot faster. So what you're genius in doesn't matter. What matters is that you're genius and you're able to be more creatively powerful in your realm. And that's also very thrilling. EAT. Energized, activated, and thrilled. So one of the questions I like to ask is, which snowflake is the most beautiful, right? And of course, ha ha ha, they're all beautiful. And the same analogy applies to, which neural network is more beautiful? The genius nurse, the genius janitor, the genius doctor, the genius CEO. It doesn't matter. right? That's an evolutionary biological brain trick that says that, self-esteem, meaning I want to have higher status, so the more money I make and the more degrees I have and the more status I have, the better I am. No, that's a lower brain dopamine trick. It actually doesn't matter for happiness, maximum happiness, all right? Similarly, what task you focus on, whether it's data processing, analysis, service, innovation, strategy, it doesn't matter what the task is. If you're a genius of it, becoming genius is exhilarating, activating the higher brain is exhilarating, and it's thrilling to be creative in your realm. Get away from the social brainwashing that you need to be X, Y, and Z in order to be considered valuable or good. If we can start to undo that brainwashing, we can take the pressure off of people in order to they're collapsing under the pressure of expectations. Now, before you think means I'm going to take the pressure off performance, no, we're saying that don't tie performance to self-esteem. Fall in love with performance management or challenge in order to grow neural networks. There's a different reason to want to be great at what you want to be great at. So, and we talked about this, time, focus, and emotions are the key to growing neural networks, but in particular, metrics, accountability from as many human beings as possible, and regular goalposts on a daily basis, and then you can guarantee that you're going to grow those neural networks in the area that you want to. But your lower brain's going to constantly trick you out of getting feedback all the time. So the more feedback you can tolerate on a daily basis, the more you are guaranteed to grow and become powerful in the area that you want to really excel at, for its own sake, not for validation, not for money. That's a dopamine lower brain trick. So this is a saw cutting a piece of concrete, and you can see that there's some water being splashed on it. Why is that there? Why is the water there? Because, if you don't, how are we doing on time? Are we getting...
Yeah, it's 107.
Okay, are we going to 110?
Yeah.
Okay. I need to speed it up, actually. Let me actually go forward a little bit. Let me summarize it with this one slide right here. So I said, stop the madness, 3 steps. I actually changed it to 3 steps to save the world now. I said in the title 2 steps, but our crack team is working around the clock, and we just discovered another step. So I'm going to give you, you've been a great audience, so I'm going to throw in an extra step for free. So this summarizes this whole talk, and this slide by itself, and I'll leave it up there for discussing afterwards. But because we can speak about this, you can come afterwards, and we can chit-chat about this. But on the right side is step 1 of Stop the Madness, which is we are all part of a collective madness that we've been too dependent on external motivation to get people to do things. Motivating people with emotional reward and motivating people with economic reward or penalty or emotional penalty to get people to do things. And what we've unintentionally done is jacked up people's lower brains. And then what happens is the dopamine swings up and down. They suffer. If they have too much of a drop, they release stress hormones, which disconnect the higher brain. Or they say, I don't want to be on this roller coaster ride, get me off of this, and they stop engaging life, and then they start to empty out anyways. It's like you're like a bucket. I know that's a really sexy analogy, but you're like a magical bucket, and we can actually tell you based on hormones and electrochemical signals and what part of the brain is lighting up, how happy, healthy, and connected you are. And so if you're too lower brain dominant, you're going to empty out the bucket and you're going to really suffer. But there's an alternative, which is you can quickly flip your mindset to be a radical growth mindset and really fall in love with learning and growing and accepting feedback and learning to recognize when you've gone lower brain and then flip yourself back to higher brain. And so that's the big takeaway message is the 3 steps to save the world is that if we are very lower brain dominant and there's 8 billion people that are lower brain dominant, we are going to destroy the earth. And we're on our way in terms of animal species, ocean-based species, land-based species, the mental health crisis that's now upon us. Mental health crisis plus weapons of mass destruction, a scary scenario, as well as climate system disruption. So We have to be less consumptive for our happiness, which is what lower brain does. If we can become more radical growth mindset and get to the left side of the graph there and become more higher brain dominant, we can do that right where we are right now. And so that's the recommendation. And just a last slide to show you. We've done this group. We did this with a group of about 3 groups in a row of 80 people, and showed a profound reduction in depression and anxiety, improvements in psychological well-being, improvements in quality of life, and dramatic improvements in sleep. We talked about that. It's very difficult to do. So the message I have for you is very hopeful. Like, this is after just 6 2-hour sessions of learning these kinds of ideas. You've learned a lot of them, and you're gonna. We'll get the slides too. There's more information that you can learn from. But we are much more malleable than you realize. It can happen much faster than you realize. Within days, you can start shifting your mindset and getting off of lower brain and becoming more higher brain dominant. And it's really a much more glorious way to live your life. And everyone can do this. And this is what we need to learn, and we need to teach each other. Step 1, get off the right side, that roller coaster. Step 2, get onto the rocket ship of the higher brain. Step 3 is start teaching this to other people, and we have a chance to really save the world from mental health and biosphere destruction. So I thank you for this opportunity.
Thank you, Dr. Nijhawan, for that excellent presentation. If you have a question for Dr. Nijhawan, you can come to the head table. He has agreed to stay for a few minutes, and we are adjourned.
Good job.